What is up, music lovers? Thank you so much for clicking on the video, and you saw the title, you know what this is. Today, we are going to be ranking every single Iron Maiden album from best to worst. And it's going to be pretty interesting because even though I don't listen to Iron Maiden very much anymore, they are one of the most important bands in metal and in my personal journey as a musician. And more so than any other band, I think they really kind of put in my mind what an album should be and how an album should be structured. And with the exception of maybe Rush, they are probably tied for the band that has the most albums that just really influenced me and really stuck with me. So it's going to be difficult for me not to put every single one of their albums up in S tier. Well, actually, no, it won't be that difficult, but there will be a lot that I'll be wanting to put up there. And I think there's going to be a couple albums that I have sort of unconventional opinion on. There's gonna be a couple that I put pretty low that I feel like are kind of, in my opinion, a bit overhyped. So, if I say something you disagree with, don't get all bent out of shape. It's cool. Just let me know what you think in the comments. And before we go any further, if you like hard rock, progressive metal, any kind of guitar-driven music, feel free to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. All that YouTube stuff. I know it's a cliche to ask, but it really does help the channel grow. So thank you in advance for that. And yeah, let's just get right into it. Okay, so first up we have their debut album from 1980, which in my opinion is one of the greatest debut albums of all time, and I'm going to put it up in S tier. In terms of just having a sound that is so distinct and so fully realized on your first album is actually super difficult. And when you think of amazing bands like Haken or Mastodon or Dream Theater or Metallica, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Rush, name any band, and usually their first album is very much in the shadow of their influences. So, for example, the first Haken album sounds a lot like Dream Theater. The first Dream Theater album sounds a lot like Rush. The first Rush album sounds a lot like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. And you can kind of apply that to most bands. Like, their first album really is hard to be as unique as this first Iron Maiden album is. And I think that probably had a lot to do with the fact that they were around for 5-6 years before they got a record deal, so they really had a lot of time to hone what worked. This album doesn't overstay its welcome at all. It's just 9 songs. They're all really good. I love Remember Tomorrow. The transition from Transylvania into Strange World is amazing. The energy is great. Of course, you have songs like Phantom of the Opera and Running Free. Yeah, it's a really great album, and it still holds up even upon, re-listening to it for the zillionth time. One thing I want to say is that this artwork is incredible, and I do not like the 1998 reissue artwork. I feel like it's just inferior in every way compared to the original hand-drawn artwork by Derek Riggs, so there's my one minor gripe about the album. But yeah, it's pretty incredible, and I think that's probably the standard opinion on that first album. What might not be a standard opinion and what might get me in a little bit of trouble is that I think Killers is one of the worst albums they had in the 80s. It's still a great album. I'm going to put it in A tier. But as far as their 1980s output goes, I feel as though Killers, while it has a lot of amazing songs, as an album, it has some lulls and it has a couple songs that probably should have been cut. And don't get me wrong, I love this album. It's still up in A tier. But I feel like if you took The Ides of March, Wrathchild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Killers, Prodigal Son, Purgatory, and Drifter, and then maybe add in one more song from the album, you would have an amazing, incredible album that is just banger after banger after banger. But with Killers, though, it's one of the few Iron Maiden albums that has more than 8 or 9 tracks, that has 11 songs on it. And you have that back-to-back of Another Life, Genghis Khan, Innocent Exile, and then you have Twilight Zone towards the end. And none of these songs are terrible, but I really don't think they're as good as those 7 songs that I named, the kind of highlights of the album. So as an album, I feel like there's kind of that bog down a little bit, kind of gets weighed down by some songs that should have just been cut. And, you can have 1 or 2 songs on an album that maybe feel like, oh, they're not as good as the others, because every album has to have a little bit of a lull. But when you have 4 songs maybe you should have cut a couple of them. So that's just my opinion. I still think that overall the highs on this album are some of Iron Maiden's best. I still think it's a great album, and it has way better production than their debut, but I just think the debut is a bit more focused, and if Killers had a bit more focus as a full album, it would have been up in S tier. Okay, and coming up next is The Number of the Beast, one of the most important albums in heavy metal history, and of course I'm putting it up in S tier. I mean, this album is just incredible from beginning to end. I really don't have too much to say about it because it is such a monumental album in rock and metal history. Every single song is still an absolute banger. When the worst song on an album is maybe Gangland or Total Eclipse, you know you have a really good album. And the ending song of Hallowed Be Thy Name, Bruce Dickinson's performance on this album, Clive Burr's drumming, Children of the Damned, Invaders, everything about this album just kicks ass. And it still sounds just as good when I listen back to it as it did the first time I heard it. So not much else to say other than it's Number of the Beast. Where else would I put it other than S tier? And another album that I don't feel is going to shock anyone when I put it up in S tier is 1983's Peace of Mind. I'm going to put it above the debut, but for me, I'm going to put it below Number of the Beast. Not by much. It is very difficult, but the reason I'm going to put it just a little bit below Number of the Beast is because I feel that Number of the Beast maybe has a bit more ebb and flow in terms of the dynamics of the album. I guess I prefer Gangland and Total Eclipse to Quest for Fire and Sun and Steel, even though, again, if the worst songs on your album are Quest for Fire and Sun and Steel, that's a pretty damn good album. And just like the debut and Number of the Beast, the album doesn't overstay its welcome. It has 9 songs, they're all bangers, they all feel distinct. They start off with a gut-punching Where Eagles Dare. They end with an epic To Tame a Land. They have a couple short songs thrown in between. You have The Trooper, Die With Your Boots On, Flight of Icarus. When I said that, like, Iron Maiden kind of defined for me what albums should be, it's albums like Peace of Mind, Number of the Beast, and the debut that I'm talking about. Have 8 or 9 songs, make sure each one of them stands out, and end with an epic. Make sure the listener always wants more. Peace of Mind really does that, and it does it incredibly. So, I mean, do I have to justify putting Peace of Mind up in S tier? I don't think I do. This might be another hot take, and maybe something I do have to justify a bit more, but coming in next is 1984's Power Slave, and I think this is one of the weaker Iron Maiden albums from the 80s. Don't kill me for that, I'm still putting it up in A tier. I think, I'll put it below Killers for now, but I might move it up. I still love this album, but I remember an interview with Steve Harris that I read years ago where he said that he felt as though the standout tracks on the album were Power Slave, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, Aces High, and 2 Minutes to Midnight, and that the songs in the middle are kind of not bad, but not quite as good. And I sort of agree with that, although I do love Flash of the Blade, The Duelist, and Loose for Words. Back in the Village is one of the few Iron Maiden songs that I'm pretty ambivalent towards. I just kind of hear it and I'm like, okay, well, that's a song. I think I'll keep it right where it is. I still love it, and I'm going to be happy if I'm listening to it, but I think that Killers has still a little bit more experimentation with songs like Prodigal Son. Songs like Purgatory really, like, grab me. And Power Slave, even though I love it, well, you know what, though? I think I am going to put it ahead of Killers because it is a more concise album than Killers. Killers has a little bit of a drag, and even though songs like Prodigal Son or Purgatory kind of make me want to put Killers ahead of it, I do think that Power Slave is an album that doesn't overstay its welcome, and even though I'm not really a big fan of songs like Back in the Village, and I love Flash of the Blade, but I don't think it should be the first Iron Maiden song anyone ever hears. So yeah, Power Slave, not quite as good as these albums in my opinion, but still really good. Hopefully that doesn't piss off too many people. I know that Power Slave is kind of seen by a lot as one of their best albums. I still have it up in A tier, but I just think it's a a little bit weaker when you compare it to most of the albums that came before. Coming up next, I feel as though I might be a bit biased because I was just listening to this album earlier today, but I'm going to put Somewhere in Time up in S tier. Does that feel right? Let me see. You know what? I want to put Somewhere in Time up in S tier, but just so that I'm not putting too many things in there, I will put Somewhere in Time at the top of A tier. This album is really incredible, and once again, it follows the same formula of having 8 or 9 songs and ending with an epic, not really overstaying its welcome at all. It's a little bit different compared to the other ones in that it begins with an 8-minute long song, which Caught Somewhere in Time is an absolute banger. Wasted Years, Sea of Madness. I really love the loneliness of the Long Distance Runner and Deja Vu. Alexander the Great is one of my favorite songs too. The interlude, the 2.5 minute solo section is incredible. It's something that if you just want to understand why guitar is the greatest instrument of all time, go listen to that. I honestly kind of want to put it up in S tier, but I just think maybe these albums up here were a bit more influential on me, and I heard them at a time in my life where they left a bigger impression. Although part of me does kind of think that Somewhere in Time is up there with them. Well, let's just say it's A tier on the cusp of S. So that's where I'm going to put Somewhere in Time. And I'm sure a lot of people have said this before, but Derek Riggs, who did the artwork for all the Iron Maiden albums in the 80s, really outdid himself with the artwork for Somewhere in Time. It is absolutely incredible, the level of detail that he put into it. Okay, so coming up next is Somewhere in Time, and I'm going to put it up in S tier, and I'm going to put it ahead of the debut. For me personally, I think I'm going to put it ahead of Peace of Mind, and it's going to be tied with Number of the Beast. Infinite Dreams, The Prophecy, The Clairvoyant, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Only the Good Die Young. Every single song in this album is incredible, and just like with Number of the Beast, the debut, and Peace of Mind, I heard it when I was at a really impressionable age, and it's just stuck with me ever since. So I don't feel as though I have too much more I can contribute. It's just a pretty special album, and I feel like they really knocked it out of the park with that one. And that's kind of, again, I feel like the consensus about this album. I think that most people see it as one of their best. Okay, so now we're getting to the first Iron Maiden album that was not in the 80s, so all these S and A tiers, they're going to be more sparse as we go on with the video. Although I feel like this is another one of my sort of hot takes about Iron Maiden. I actually think No Prayer for the Dying is a pretty solid album, and I will gladly put it in B tier. I do think you could make an argument that No Prayer for the Dying is more focused than Power Slave and more concise than Killers. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that No Prayer for the Dying is the first time that Iron Maiden isn't really breaking new ground, and it does feel as though Iron Maiden is kind of, for the first time, looking back and being like, oh yeah, let's do that song, but a different version of it. But with all that being said, there's actually a lot that I quite enjoy in this album, and while I don't think that it's something that you should show someone who's getting into Iron Maiden so that they can understand why Iron Maiden is such a great band, I do think that if you're a fan of the early albums like Killers and the debut and even Peace of Mind or Number of the Beast, it is nice to see Iron Maiden kind of doing a more raw, stripped down version of their sound. There is an energy to this album that I do like with the introduction of Yannick there. I feel like the band is having fun while they record these songs. And even though it's nothing new or groundbreaking, I do think it's solid from beginning to end. I love Tail Gunner, Holy Smoke. No Prayer for the Dying, I think, is one of Iron Maiden's best songs. And even the songs that aren't as amazing are still pretty memorable. I don't think there's a bad song on this album. The fact that the band seems like they're having fun at times is a bit of a double-edged sword, though, because there are a few vocal performance choices that Bruce Dickinson does on this album that I don't think they quite land, you know? I love the song Holy Smoke, but in the bridge when Bruce Dickinson says smells good, or in Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter when Bruce Dickinson all of a sudden puts on a Scottish accent, I don't know, that's an interesting choice. But I'm glad that they're having fun, but I maybe would have, if I was in the room, been like, no, no, do a different take. Don't do that. Cut that line out here. But however, overall, I think No Prayer for the Dying is a pretty solid album that doesn't get the attention it deserves. And another opinion that I feel like is going to kind of get me in some hot water, but I'm going to stand by it. I think Fear of the Dark is actually a pretty subpar album, and I'm going to put it in C tier. Now I can already hear people saying, and before I kind of trash this album a bit, Be Quick or Be Dead, Afraid to Shoot Strangers, the title track, and Wasting Love are all really good songs. I also absolutely adore Judas Be My Guide. I think that is one of Iron Maiden's best songs. I think I even had it in my top 20 for the video I did there. It is an incredible song that does not get the love it deserves. And, you know, even Childhood's End is a pretty good song. But apart from those standout tracks, this album to me is a slog. It's just not fun. You have Chains of Misery, The Apparition, The Fugitive, Fear is the Key, Weekend Warrior. I mean, like half of this album to me is just very, very dull. And unlike No Prayer for the Dying, I feel like this is an album where Iron Maiden isn't having much fun. You know, Bruce Dickinson would leave shortly thereafter. So I think that people remember this album more fondly than I think it deserves to be remembered, because of the title track and because of Be Quick or Be Dead and Wasting Love and Afraid to Shoot Strangers, which are all great songs, but for me, I just kind of feel like it's lackluster and a bit boring. Okay, so coming up next is The X Factor, first album without Bruce Dickinson. I'll put it down in eh. I feel like that's another kind of popular opinion. Before I go talk about it more, though, I do want to say that I think Blaze Bayley is not at fault for this album, and I think that the problems with this album don't really have much to do with him as a vocalist. I think it just sort of has to do with where the band was at the time they were making it. If Blaze Bayley was singing on an Iron Maiden album that was sort of more reminiscent of Killers or the debut, he could have really fit into the band well. He has sort of that Paul Di'Anno raspiness to him, but he's not really being allowed to find his own voice, I feel like. And something that people say a lot about later Iron Maiden albums is that the songs are just too long and they don't have enough interesting things going on in them. And I kind of agree that that is the case with this album. I also think that the traces of cynicism that was becoming more and more prominent with No Prayer for the Dying, Fear of the Dark, and then the X Factor, it's becoming more and more a feature of the lyrics and sort of the atmosphere, which I think was kind of a product of that 1990s, you know, hey, hair metal's dead, grunge is the new thing, how are we going to fit into it? We have to be edgy. But I don't think it's aged particularly well. I don't think that Blaze Bayley should get any of the hate. I feel like, as I said, it's not his fault. He just joined this band, which, of course, if you had the opportunity to be the singer in Iron Maiden, you would jump at that chance, I'm sure. And even if you got, you know, James LaBrie from Dream Theater or Michael Kiske from Halloween, or if Rob Halford from Judas Priest sang on this album, all those singers kind of fit what people expect from Iron Maiden more, and they could probably do a better job of like replicating Bruce Dickinson's style. Even if they were on this album, it would still kind of feel like the band is burned out, I think. And speaking of burned out, Virtual 11, I'll put it above the X Factor because it does feel like Blaze Bayley is a bit more confident with his singing on this album. It has the Klansmen, which is fun, and it does sound like the band is having a bit more fun on this album. Even still, though, it's just not very memorable for me. Okay, and coming up next is the reunion album, the comeback album, Brave New World from 2000. And for a long time, I would have put this album up in S tier because it was one of the 5 Iron Maiden albums that just really impacted me, that I heard at an impressionable age, that really stuck with me. I think I'm going to put it down in A tier, though, because the more I listen to it and the more I've heard it, I think it's pretty great, and I do love it, but there are, not that any of the songs are bad, But this album does kind of have a habit of repeating the chorus a lot, which once you notice, I feel like it's hard to unnotice. But songs like Ghost of Navigators or Out of the Silent Planet um, or Dream of Mirrors, I love all those songs. But they do, again, like I just said, they repeat the chorus maybe a little bit too much. I don't want to put it at the bottom of A tier, though. I still like it more than Killers. Ugh, I probably like it more than Power Slave, to be honest. Do I like it more than Somewhere in Time? I think maybe I do. You know, I'll just put it right below Somewhere in Time because I'm holding my feet to the fire. And I'm trying to not put every single Iron Maiden album that I love up in S tier. I'll put it in A tier. And coming up next, we have Dance of Death coming out in 2003. And I honestly don't think Dance of Death has the worst album art of any Iron Maiden album. I think that belongs to maybe the Blaze Bailey albums or maybe even Fear of the Dark, but we're not ranking it on album artwork. We're ranking it as an album, and I'm going to put it in B tier ahead of No Prayer for the Dying. Kind of like with Killers, this album has a couple songs that are absolute god tier bangers, and then it has a couple songs that kind of feel like padding. Rainmaker, No More Lies, the title track, and especially Passchendaele are all top tier Iron Maiden songs. I think I had Passchendaele as like my second favorite Iron Maiden song. It is incredible. Wildest Dreams and Montsegur are also amazing Iron Maiden songs. Maybe not quite on the same level as Rainmaker, No More Lies, and Passchendaele, but really close. And I know I butchered the pronunciation of that song. The song about the Cathars all being burned to death in the Middle Ages. That song. That's the song I'm talking about. It's badass. But when you get past those highlights, the album does drag a little bit. You have songs like Age of Innocence, Face in the Sand, New Frontier, Gates of Tomorrow. They're not bad, but they're also not really standouts, I think. I also feel as though the lyrics to Age of Innocence and Face in the Sand are kind of those cliche, cynical, politicians are lying, people are dying, things are bad now lyrics. And I really don't like when Iron Maiden does that. I feel like if you're going to talk about something in society, you have to be very specific about it. So take, for example, War Pigs by Black Sabbath. They don't make any bones about what they're talking about in that song. Or think about System of a Down or Rage Against the Machine songs. They're taking a stand in their lyrics, and they're saying, hey, this song is about X, this song's about Y. We don't care if you disagree with us, this is important, and we're not just going to kind of wax poetically about how the world is bad, but leave it vague enough so that we don't upset anybody because we say something they disagree with. So for those reasons, I have Dance of Death in B tier. It's still a pretty solid album, and I do enjoy all the songs on it, and the highs on it are really, really good, but it does have some padding. Another really good album from this era that has some really good high points is A Matter of Life and Death. I'm definitely going to put it in B tier. And I think this is going to be hard because I think that No Prayer for the Dying is more consistent. But I think that A Matter of Life and Death has greater highs. Like The Longest Day, The Reincarnation of Benjamin Brieg, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns. Those songs are all absolute bangers, and I think that they surpass anything on No Prayer for the Dying. But I think that No Prayer for the Dying is just more solid throughout. So, I'll put A Matter of Life and Death above No Prayer for the Dying, but with the caveat that, I don't know, it's pretty close. I'm not sure. Okay, and the next album we're going to be ranking is 2010's The Final Frontier. I think this is going to be another hot take for me, but am I going to do it? Yeah, I'm going to put The Final Frontier up in A tier. I'm doing it. This album, at least from what I've heard, kind of gets slagged on a little bit. People feel as though this is when Iron Maiden started really coming up with the long songs that needed to be shorter. I just really love this album, and I did hear it at an age when I think I was pretty impressionable. I was maybe like 14, 15 when this album came out, and it was the first new Iron Maiden album when by the time I had started listening to them. It was the first one I remember getting excited about because A Matter of Life and Death had come out in 2006, so I didn't quite know about Iron Maiden then, and this came out in 2010, so I had a couple years of looking forward to it. And this is also when I saw them live, so that may be coloring my impression of the album. But with all that out of the way, this album has a lot of bangers on it. The first half, Satellite 15, The Final Frontier, El Dorado, Mother of Mercy, and then following it up with Coming Home and The Alchemist, are all really good songs. And then you have Isle of Avalon, which I think is one of their great epic songs. It's an absolute banger. Starblind is great. Even When the Wild Wind Blows, which I think up until this point was their second longest song. I think maybe only Sign of the Cross and Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner were longer. It's still good though. It has enough changes in it. It has enough going on to keep it interesting. I think that every single song on The Final Frontier is a really good song, and it's solid throughout. So again, I don't know if people kind of disagree with me on that. This is an album that I feel like is a bit divisive, but yeah, you know what? I'm happy with putting it in A tier. And oh, am I gonna do it? Yeah, I'm putting it ahead of Killers. Sorry. I think that Killers, again, those high points of it are probably better than this, but overall, I think that The Final Frontier doesn't have a single dud on it. I will keep it below Power Slave, but I don't know if that's going to piss off some people, me putting The Final Frontier so high and me putting it above Killers, but that's my opinion. So let me know if you think I'm an idiot in the comments. Okay, and coming up next is The Book of Souls, Iron Maiden's first double album. And I'm going to put it in C tier. This album has some high points, but overall, I think it's just way too long, and a lot of the songs feel as though they're just padding. If Eternity Should Fail is cool, and I believe that that was a song that Bruce was writing for one of his solo albums, and then he just kind of turned it into an Iron Maiden song. I love the intro to it. Speed of Light is a cool Deep Purple homage. The Great Unknown, The Red and the Black, and When the River Runs Deep, I feel like they're fine, but they go on for too long. And Shadows in the Valley, I can't help but hear Wasted Years when I hear that intro. I do think that The Book of Souls has an absolute banger of a riff. It's an Iron Maiden song that you don't really get too much, because Iron Maiden never really has like big, heavy, chunky riffs, kind of in the vein of Black Sabbath or Soundgarden or something like that. They usually have leads and gallops and are a bit more melodic, but the riff in The Book of Souls kicks ass, and that is a song that I considered having as one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs, so I think it's good. I also think Tears of the Clown is good, and Empire of the Clouds, even though I've been saying that Iron Maiden should edit down their songs, and that's an 18-minute long one, I think it's done well, and there's enough going on in it to keep it interesting. Death or Glory is the third song Iron Maiden's written about aerial combat. You had Aces High, which was the Battle of Britain. You had Tail Gunner, which was the war in the Pacific during World War II. And then you have Death or Glory, which is World War I fighter pilots. And it is funny that Empire of the Clouds is about an aircraft as well. So it's almost as if the singer for this band is a pilot and has a fascination with air travel. I don't know, that sounds crazy. That can't be the case, right? I almost want to put The Book of Souls above Fear of the Dark, but I'm not going to do that because I already put The Final Frontier above Killers, and I felt like if I did that, I would have to go into hiding. So it's definitely not an amazing Iron Maiden album, but there is enough to enjoy from it that I don't think it's among their worst. I would listen to any of these above it, but the highlights on it are pretty good. Okay, and then the last Iron Maiden album we have is Senjutsu from 2021, and I'll just put it down in eh. I'm really bummed to put it down in eh, because Nico McBrain's drumming on the title track is great. I enjoy Death of the Celts. I really wanted to like love and like this album, but overall it just doesn't leave much of an impression on me, and that could also just be where I'm at in my own musical journey. I'm more often than not listening to bands like Death or Mastodon or Opeth or Haken or Caligula's Horse nowadays. And so my kind of mindset and what I'm receptive to really latching onto is completely different than what it was when I was a teenager listening to all these albums. But with that being said, I mean, there's nothing on it that's god awful or terrible. Like I said, there are a few songs I enjoy, there's a few aspects I enjoy. I can see this being an album that if you listen to it at a certain age or at a certain time in your life when you're first getting into this style of music, you'd really like it. But for me personally, it just doesn't do much for me. Maybe years in the future I'll re-listen to it and it will click with me. But for right now, I kind of do rank it with the worst albums by Iron Maiden. But that's just my opinion, and it is 100,000 times easier to make a video ranking all of Iron Maiden's albums than it is to make a single album, even if it's not a good one. And Iron Maiden are one of the most important bands in rock, metal, popular music in general, so, the fact that I don't really like these few albums, I feel like is pretty inconsequential when you look at their legacy and just look at banger album after banger album after banger album. As it stands right now, because this is a video for YouTube where I have to rank all these albums, this is my ranking. Number of the Beast up at the top, The X Factor down at the bottom, Final Frontier up in A tier, and Fear of the Dark down in C. But let me know how you would rank these albums in the comments below. What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? What do you think of this ranking? Like always, thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Check out some of my other stuff, and I hope to see you at the next video. Take care.